Sponsors for today's class, sponsored by Perry and Sarah Greenbaum, so we thank you for the sponsorship. Today we're learning PARSHA Bo. And we're going to start in the 12th chapter, which is on page 348. Now, there is a covenant that is taking place here. And when you read the details of the Paschal Lamb of the Korban Pesach, you note that the Torah links the observance of this covenant with another one. The blood of the Paschal Lamb is actually linked to the blood of the Brit Milah covenant. The Torah itself notes that a male who is not circumcised, did not have the Brit, the covenant of the Milah, cannot perform and cannot participate in the Paschal Lamb and the Korban Pesach. So the two are related. Why are there two covenants and how do they relate to one another? And by the way, the relationship is quite deep. We know that one of the forms of punishment that exists in our system is known as karet, some kind of spiritual disconnection. Not so clear exactly how it manifests itself. There are different descriptions provided. But obviously, if the essence of the Jewish being is a connection to this higher being, and you are told that specific practices, specific behaviors lead to a disconnect, it's something you try to avoid, not just at home, everywhere, right? Now, the general rule is that this karet, this disconnect, is mentioned and relates to negative commandments, meaning do not go ahead and eat that prohibited fat. It leads to karet. When it comes to positive commandments, we don't find that. It seems to be that if you threaten punishment to get someone to do something, in general it doesn't work. On positive commandments, on a mitzvat esed, go ahead and actively perform the good deed, you're not going to find this karet, with two exceptions to the rule. Brit Milah and Korban Pesach. They are both quite significant. There's a covenant there. The covenant for the individual, the Brit Milah. And remember, we males got it from Avraham Avinu, the lonely man. The man that is standing there alone. You can never describe him as being a nation, perhaps the father of a nation. He's a lonely man. He is called Avraham HaIvri, and according to some explanations, that means that the whole world is on one side of the river. He crossed the river. Symbolically, he separates himself from humanity. Not an easy task. A covenant for the individual, but we upgrade. We turn ourselves from individuals and we gain a national identity right here as we are leaving Egypt. That's the beginning of our national identity, which is our spiritual identity. So that is the covenant of the Korban Pesach. Details are provided regarding the Korban Pesach. And I would like to go through them. So let's turn to page 348, verse 1 of chapter 12, where the Almighty speaks to Moshe and Aharon. Aharon gets some serious credit here, even though in general he is not the transmitter of Torah, but when it comes to Egypt and his involvement in the Exodus, grants him mention here in this verse. So we are told in verse 2 that you should know that this month will be the beginning of the months for you. And now comes the mitzvah on page 358. Daberu el kol adat Yisrael, page 350, excuse me. And they are told that you have to begin the process of preparing yourselves by getting a lamb, and that occurs on the 10th day of this month, the month of Nisan. Now, this is significant meat. You don't want leftovers. So therefore, be sure to assemble a group that either has someone with a very good appetite, or be sure that the numbers of the members of this group match the size of the animal. What if in your household, you don't have enough? In verse 4, if the household is too small for the lamb or the kid, then what do? What are neighbors for, right? Involved over to eat. So then, invite over the shachen, and you participate in this Paschal lamb. Verse 5, this is supposed to be an unblemished lamb that is within the first year of its life. In verse 7, we are told that you perform an act with the blood. Covenants are with blood. So in verse 7, V'lakchu min hadam, you should take from the blood. V'natnu, and the blood of this animal should be placed on the doorposts, mezuzot, ve'ala mashkof, and the lintel. On the doorpost and on the lintel. Now, what is the order presented here? How is God presenting to Moshe Rabbeinu the order of things? First the doorpost, and only after that's the lintel, right? Keep that in mind. How do you eat the meat? In verse 8, this is eaten at night. Sli esh, it should be roasted over fire. And it is eaten together with the bitter herbs and, of course, the matzah. Do not cook it, we are warned. Do not cook it. And it is roasted, and this you will find towards the end of verse 9, its head, its legs with the innards. It has to be all one unit. The innards are roasted together. Fine. Come the commentators and they explain. If this is a sacrifice that symbolizes this idea that we unite as a nation, we become one unit. We are no longer just a unit as individuals, but we become a nation here. So therefore, all those things presented in the Korban Pesach must relate to this concept of bringing the people together. So therefore, for example, you want to create a community. When you have a community, by the way, and you do for your community, you do acts of chesed, you do, bikur cholim, you are involved in stuccos. You are doing for the people of Israel because your community symbolizes Klal Yisrael. In other words, you can't do for everyone, so you choose your community, but this community represents all of the people of Israel. So if you are involved in Sorkei Tzibur, in communal needs, the community symbolizes the people of Israel. So too here, if you want to go ahead and convey a message to every single Jew that you are part of this new unit called Klal Yisrael, so therefore create for yourself a small community, you and your neighbor, you sit together. You're not supposed to jump, we are told, from one. If you go ahead and commit yourself to be part of a specific lamb, a specific group that is going to be slaughtered for the Korban Pesach. Once it is slaughtered, you don't jump from group to group. If someone agitates you, right, after it is slaughtered, and then you say to yourself, Gewalt, I'm going to be spending the Seder night with that guy, right? Forget it. So then I want to go to someone else, and I ask them, can I join your group? So we are told, after the Korban Pesach is slaughtered, you're stuck with your group. Perhaps a message that don't jump from shul to shul. If you get a little bit insulted, maybe, who knows what the message should be there. But you recognize the idea that if you are creating a community, when you create a community, there are times that there are going to be challenges, right? Sorkei Tzibur could create some white hair, right? Yes?
Was the obligation on everybody? And if not everybody, who was the one that actually did the korban? Who got this animal?
So the animal itself was purchased by a group of people. One person, of course, is the one that's going to slaughter it. In general, it's the Kohen. They bring it back and they eat it together. They sit down around the Seder night. And once
it wasn't every individual's obligation to bring the korban. It was within a group.
Representative, like a messenger. In other words, you have someone doing it for you. We have the concept of shlichut, that when the messenger does something for you, it is as if you did it, So when you are sitting there together with the others, that is your mini community, and you are obviously teaching this concept that there is this new identity and a new covenant we have with God, not just as individuals, and throughout the exile, by the way, our identity is the individual's identity. It's a reality. We upgrade with redemption and we become a national identity. It's interesting that I've mentioned this here. Martin Gilbert, who was the great historian of Churchill and a Zionist, not a Jew, but a person that had a tremendous appreciation for what was occurring in the land of Israel. What?
I thought it was Jewish.
Okay, sorry. I skipped the table. Okay.
He converted.
If he was Jewish, so then Adrabah. If he is not Jewish, he's Hasidei Olam, a righteous person. So I think we covered all bases. Okay. Now, Martin Gilbert, among the many books he wrote about Israel, he wrote about Jerusalem. And when did Jerusalem turn into this significant, large city? In other words, Jerusalem, we all know that by the 1870s, it's a city that there's no room for all the people in it. They need to expand. Therefore, Montefiore starts this idea of neighborhoods that are outside of the walls. And they have the Mishkenot Sha'ananim, which turned into Yamin Moshe. We should have purchased some real estate then, a little, in 1870. Would have been a wise idea. Those houses, I think it was around 1870, were given for free. And the Jews, to try to convince people to move out of the old city, and what they did was, Yiddish Cup, they wanted the new house, but they still wanted the security to be inside the old city. So during the day, they would go to their houses, and at night, they would go back into the old city where they would lock the doors, meaning they would close the city. That's the reality that existed. So he wonders about this expansion. Yerushalayim, if you visit Yerushalayim in the 17th and the 18th century, it's not exactly this major, attracting place. What occurs? So he actually identifies the year when things start developing. And that is, and he writes a book, I think it was called From 1838 to 1868, if I'm not mistaken. 1838 is the year he identifies as things developing in Yerushalayim. And the process of our, whatever we have merited in Eretz Yisrael, you can actually date back to 1838. Now, if you are a mystic, if you are mystical, so you could turn to the Kabbalistic and to the Zohar, and it actually makes reference to the fact that in the year Taf Resh, which is occurring in September 1839, right? There's going to be some kind of illumination, spiritual illumination that is going to occur that will bring Jews back to Eretz Yisrael. So if you're a mystic, it works out very well. 1838, 1839, that's the period. If you are a historian, you know very well that up until 1837, if you lived in Eastern Europe and you wanted to go to Eretz Yisrael to be inspired, you would actually make Tzfat your target. Why Tzfat? It's a mystical place next to Miram. The mystics were there. 1837, there was an awful earthquake there. Following the earthquake, Yerushalayim begins its comeback. Fine. Now, I believe that there's something else there that we merited during that period of time. Now, when you say 1838, it's not like, Rosh Hashanah of that year, suddenly these things are gradual. But something quite awesome occurs in the year 1840. There's a major tragedy in Damascus, the Damascus affair, where they tortured Jews and they accused them of all kind of things. The brutality was nothing new, right? Perhaps it's new that the Muslims were doing it because the Christians had a long record of doing so. But what changed was the Jewish reaction to it. Up until that point, throughout our history, if they are, if they're massacring, or if there's a massacre, if there is a pogrom in Eastern Europe, the Jews in Western Europe are taking care of themselves. If they are expelling Jews from France in 1306, and you are lucky enough to be in Poland at that time, you say Baruch Hashem, I'm in Poland. In 1840, the whole world, the whole Jewish world, was up in arms for what was happening in Damascus. From London and even in Washington, there was a reaction. Not too many Jews here at the time in North America. but there was a reaction. And you sense that Klal Yisrael at that time merited something incredible, that when a Jew is under attack in one place, the Jew in another location senses this is my business as well, because we are one unit. And I could see it, that begins a process. If the Jew in Galut recognizes that there is more to just the covenant I have as an individual, we have a national identity, we merit. And as a result, things have progressed since then, that Baruch Hashem, we have a very strong presence, an incredible gift of what's occurring now in Eretz Yisrael. I dated back to 1840 because we suddenly see ourselves not just as individuals. The covenant between ourselves and God is not the individual. Korban Pesach, very significant indeed what it symbolizes. And I think that there's a great merit when we take the message of Korban Pesach, when we realize we have a responsibility in the act of kindness that's occurring with all the tragedies in Eretz Yisrael. The awareness that exists among, I would say, almost all Jews in North America and throughout the world for what's happening to Jews in France and especially in Eretz Yisrael or wherever they are going through difficulties, that is the message of Korban Pesach. We have to unify. All the details presented for the Paschal Lamb relate to unifying us. The idea that it is tamim. Tamim is unblemished. But when you say something is shalem, in Aramaic it is tamim. Tamim comes from that word, it is complete. The idea that it is within its first year, one. There's a unit of one there. The idea that it is roasted, I don't know if it doesn't happen often, but you see a piece of chicken, right, that's been cooked. Cooked chicken. I'm not a big fan of cooked chicken. Because cooked chicken, you pull it out of the pot, and what happens? You get half of it. Some people like it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm not messing with anyone here today. But cooked chicken, what? Falls apart. Roasted chicken, right? We have good the wings of you there, right? It's one unit. There's one unit there. That's the difference between sli esh and bishul. So what is the Torah trying to teach us with that specific detail? This is a sacrifice when you are going to be mindful of the fact that you are a unit. You're not cooked chicken, you're roasted. You become one unit. And then you could follow the detail as well of al-kra'av ve'al-kirbo, that when you roast it, be sure that it is with its legs and innards. Keep the unit together, because I want you to learn the message of the symbolism of the Korban Pesach. It is to bring us together, this new unit called the people of Israel. There were those who were of the opinion that by actually bringing the Paschal Lamb, even before we have a temple in Jerusalem, that will bring about the Messianic era. There were those who believed it. There was a great rabbi, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Kalisher. If you ever went to a Bnai Akiva or you went to a religious Zionist school, he's probably in the top 5 in those schools. A fascinating individual. He was the one who believed that we could technically, halachically bring a Paschal Lamb, and that was his desire. He had a major impact on the Yishuv in Eretz Yisrael. He had a vision which became a reality, which was a Jewish state. It's very interesting to read about his interactions with the great rabbinic authorities, among them Rav Hirsch, who didn't see eye to eye with him, and in some ways you could say unfortunately. But he had an understanding that Europe, his belief was that something is going to occur in Europe and it will vanish, and the future is in Eretz Yisrael. And he is saying this in 1860. In 1860 he is saying it, and he had a significant impact. He wanted to bring the Korban Pesach. And even up until this day, if you follow the news in Israel on Erev Pesach, you will see that almost every year there are those who get arrested trying to make their way to the Temple Mount to bring the Korban Pesach. Where does it come from, this idea? Korban Pesach symbolizes Jewish unity. Jewish unity will bring about redemption, no question about that. We take from it the concept. There are those who want to make it something halacha l'maaseh, something practical. So this is what it's all about, the covenant. But what we have to understand, first of all, is what is the idea in verse 9 of eating it together with matzot and merorim. Be sure that when you eat that piece of roasted meat, which if you think of the Korban Pesach as a sandwich, right? It's basically a lafa. Toronto has a lot of lafa places now. Wherever you turn, right, you will find a lafa. There's a new lafa place right here, a block north, right? Now, what is a lafa? You have a pita, it's like a big pita, right? And you have some roasted meat. And the recipe here is lettuce, because as you know, matzah once upon a time was not the matzah of today. Matzah once upon a time was thicker, more like a pita or a lafa. Moror once upon a time was not what what we Europeans or some of you do of eating the horseradish mishugas, right? What was it? Lettuce. It was actually lettuce. That's what it was, and some of us still eat the lettuce. Lafa, lettuce, and roasted meat. Not bad. That was the Korban Pesach you sit there with, right? Right, Dr. Korban Pesach was called, or fabulous or famous Korban Pesach. That's what they had. That's Bali. I'm sorry. Am I in trouble with my president? Bali Korban Pesach. Okay?
And you can't call Cray Mishigas.
Right? Gets elevated due to the beats. The beats makes it. So now, that was the Korban Pesach. Now, what's the idea of the matzot and merurim? Why? I understand the significance of the meat. I think I convinced you that there's something very symbolic there. And especially if you take the Hillel approach. Remember Hillel, the sandwich? Why bring it all together into the unit? That's question number one. Question number two is, if you look carefully back in verse 7, the blood was to be placed on the two mezuzot and on the lintel, the mashkaf. When you use the word mezuzah, what comes to mind? The first thing that comes to mind is mezuzah, right? Do you put a mezuzah on both sides? I don't, right? There's a concern that there perhaps is a bal tosif. I'm adding to mitzvahs. In other words, don't become this religious person that starts making up his own religion by putting two. Obviously, it's only on one side. Why the blood on both sides? Next, so two questions we have. Question number 3, Moshe Rabbeinu eventually transmit this, if you turn to page 354, Moshe Rabbeinu, in the beginning of this chapter, he is receiving the information from Ribono Shel Olam, and then it is time for him to teach the people of Israel what was taught to him. So if you look on page 354, in verse 22, he tells them, listen, you take the bundle of hyssop, dip it into the blood. He's telling them to put the blood on the... So obviously you would expect him to say it over the way he was told. He was told that it should be placed on the mezuzot and the mashkaf. First the doorpost and afterwards the lintel. Well, guess what Moshe Rabbeinu does? He switches things around. You should place the blood ela mashkaf at the end of page 354, and on top of page 356, where else is the blood? He reverses the order. Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm sure there's a reason for it. 3 things we need to clarify. So now, number 1, when you have a covenant with God, it's an understanding that we do for him, he does for us. He doesn't really need us, it's for our sake. We do for him. But we as Jews have an appreciation of the Creator, and the Creator has an appreciation for us. We do well with him, right? We have some serious questions by studying Jewish history, but we still have deep down a belief that it's our Creator that is interested. Bnai Bechori Israel, we are considered his children, beloved children. When there is a good relationship between two parties, even when actions are done that benefit both, I want to do that same action for the sake of the other party, and the other party wants to do it for me. That's when there's a good relationship. When we come to Pesach, we call it Pesach, Pesach, Pesach. You know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you know what God calls it? Chag HaMatzot. Now, why do we not call Chag HaMatzot? So you're going to say, well, we don't want to think of the matzah right now. That's not the case. But rather, we want to give credit by mentioning what occurred and the events that occurred and what led to that holiday. We want to mention the greatness of the Creator. That we are in Egypt. Our houses are intermingled among Egyptian houses. God punishes the Egyptians, but when he passed a Jewish house, what did he do? he passed over. Pesach. We want to mention the greatness of what God did for us. That's a good relationship. We don't focus on what our contribution to the relationship. We focus on his contribution. God, on the other hand, wants to remember the fact that we leave Egypt and we didn't bake it, we didn't prepare anything, right? No pekala. Right? Jews, what do Jews do? I remember going, with my father-in-law and my aunt from Israel. We went from here to Niagara Falls. We get to Niagara Falls, the first thing we do is you take out the sandwiches. Right? And I said, I want to see things. A sandwich, this was an hour and a half besach hakol. Why do we need a sandwich? What do you mean? You have to eat the sandwich, you have to sit down. And it's a ganze mindset. That's how Jews travel. And you're hungry, you have to eat. So now, we Jews, with all the mishugas, and what do? We leave Egypt with garnished, with dough that has to be baked when we reach our destination. Chag HaMatzot. You know what Chag HaMatzot states? We are committed. We, the Jewish people, are extremely committed to the Word of God and to our relationship. So therefore, Almighty God feels that it is appropriate to label this holiday not Chag HaPesach, what He did, but rather what we did as a nation. Chag HaMatzot. Now, if there is a covenant by the door, so the doorposts could symbolize what we are building upward, what we, who are in the physical realm, are building upward. The lintel perhaps represents the one that is above. The word mashkof in Hebrew, mashkof, the lintel, actually relates to another word in Hebrew, which is lehashkif. Lehashkif is to observe. And we say that the Almighty is hashkifa, min hashamayim, that the Almighty, mima'on katshecha min hashamayim, that the Almighty watches us. The mashkof symbolizes God. The mezuzot symbolize what we build upward to have that relationship with God. So now we can have a little bit of an understanding here that if the covenant is taking place by the mezuzot and the mashkof, Almighty wants us, what does the Almighty mention first? You put the blood on the mezuzot. Only afterwards there'll be a mashkof. You do your part, because you, the people of Israel, are committed. I appreciate what you are doing. I will mention first that which you build. Moshe Rabbeinu feels that we, as Jews, should, just as we label the holiday Pesach, what should be mentioned first in the order? The mashkof. So we have an understanding there. However, we still have difficulty with why both sides, correct? And also this idea of matzot to merorim all coming together. Now, there's a statement in the Talmud that right and left symbolize two types of relationships. The Talmud notes that if you have a difficult student, and he needs to be rebuked. In other words, you have to show him that you disapprove of his actions. But you have to be very, very careful at the same time that he shouldn't walk away with an impression that his master does not value him. Very, very delicate. You can't ignore misbehavior, but you can't become too harsh. How do you balance it? Right? We're still trying to figure it out, right, with how to deal with students, children. But the Talmud notes that the appropriate way of doing it is you should have the yamin mekarevet, usmol doche. This is the rabbinic formula. The right hand, perhaps a symbol of mercy, should bring him close. Show him that you love him, show him that you appreciate what he's doing. But the reality is that you have to make note that there are things that are problematic in his behavior. The small should be doche. The rabbis tell us that some great rabbis failed with this, because the example, presented is a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Prachia, who had a student, and the master was a little bit too tough with him because he pushed him away with both hands. And the student was Yeshu HaNotzri, who founded a religion and with some good marketing became quite popular. Okay? Christianity is the byproduct of a teacher, of a master who was a little bit too tough with a student. Okay. Now, Yamin is always a symbol of God, God's presence, and the relationship we have with Him. Yamin Shemos Bnai Yisrael Yosim biyad Rama. It relates always to the right. Left. Just as in Galut, what's happening really in exile? In exile, we're not close to God. He is indicating that we are not worthy of being in our homeland. So the Galut is a little bit of a doche. It's when we are getting pushed aside from God. And the reality is that you could label the right as a time of revelation. The left, the small, which is doche, is a time when God is concealed from us. Mezuzah, the mezuzah is a sign that God is always revealed with us. You know that we call the mezuzah a malach? It's like a malach, it's like an angel. You know, this idea that the mezuzah protects us. There were those in hundreds of years ago that they used to add names of angels into the mezuzah. Maimonides, who was against it, nevertheless noted that you should know that when a person stands by the mezuzah and is mindful of the fact that everything in this world is temporary, but if you have a relationship with the Creator, that is permanent. So he knows that if you are mindful and you take the message of the mezuzah, that is like an angel. In other words, what he's trying to do is that people call the mezuzah the text of Revelation, the text that indicates that there is a God that relates to us at all times. So Maimonides tells us, don't think that it actually is so, but it is what we take from it. The mezuzah is always on the right because that symbolizes a time of when God is revealed. The left, there is no mezuzah on the left. Nevertheless, when we have the covenant, and this is the key here, when we have a covenant with God in Egypt, do not think that this is a covenant that only applies when we are where we belong. It is a mistake to believe that Jewish identity is based on a Jewish homeland. It is a mistake to believe that the process of redemption is that we leave Egypt, we get the Torah, we live in Eretz Yisrael, and live happily ever after. Now that is a mistake because we left Eretz Yisrael, and we still have a covenant with Him. Our covenant with God is not just the covenant of the right, of the time of revelation, of a time when you sense His existence. Our covenant with God is even at a time when He is concealed, even in Galut. If this is the moment of our covenant, let's remember that the covenant is for the good and also covers the period that unfortunately God is concealed. That is the idea. So that's the symbolism of blood. The mezuzah is on one side. God's revelation is on one side. That's the right. And it's interesting to note, the Second Temple period. We celebrate the Second Temple period. We had a homeland. We had a temple. Do you know that things were not going right during that period? Right? We had some significant issues there. Number one, the majority of the Jewish people were not living in Eretz Yisrael. There were Jews in Babylonia who just didn't come back. They said, well, we're going to go back to that temple. That's not as significant. It's not as prestigious as the first temple. We're not going back. There was a very strong community in Egypt. Okay? There were Jews in other places as well. So number one, it was not a time when the majority of Jews returned. Number two, during the Second Temple period, they did not have the miracles that were occurring in the temple during the First Temple. Now, nevertheless, we do celebrate it, but we understand that this is what we call a temple of Galut, as if. And even Hanukkah, when we celebrate Hanukkah, it's a celebration that there is light in darkness. It's the time when you have the long nights. We create the light. It's an understanding that even in the times of darkness, when God is not revealed, nevertheless He is there. So the menorah of Hanukkah symbolizes this idea of the left. You hear the idea. The right is the mezuzah. God is revealed. The left is when God is concealed. And if you look in Talmudic literature, when they talk about the ideal location of where you have your Ner Chanukah, it is actually by the front door on the left, on the opposite side of the mezuzah. Why? What would be the problem placing it under the mezuzah? It's not going to catch fire. So obviously it symbolizes this idea. The light, the right is a time of light. It is a time of God revealed, God making it clear that He exists. The left is the galut. Our covenant with God covers both. And of course, now we can have an understanding of why we throw the matzah and marar into the sandwich. Matzah symbolizes redemption. It's the bread of redemption. It's the bread of faith. Maror, the bitter herbs, of course, relate to the bitterness of exile. Even the bitterness of exile, that too is part of the sandwich. So therefore, when we read about the unifying it, bringing everything together, this is what the Korban Pesach is about. We bring into the mix not just the redemption, but even the bitterness of exile, having faith that there's a reason for what is taking place. Okay, so this is what is presented. This is how we understand, the Korban Pesach itself, and the many mitzvot that are mentioned in it, and the switch that occurs. We find the switch in other places as well between the mezuzah and the mashkof, but that's the idea of what it symbolizes. That's all for today. And I do thank you for coming in the snow.